Being a psychotherapist is really rewarding, and I want to share with you a story of working with somebody who had 6 sessions with me not that long ago, because I think a lot of people don't really have much of an experience of what psychotherapy is like, or they don't know what to expect or how it works or stuff. So I think this is just a nice little story that expresses what goes on between the therapist and the client in the room, and how really simple things can get in the way and cause all kinds of problems. So I'm going to read it. Sorry about that, there's a lot in here, but I want to do this justice. So you've got the glasses and the shiny top of the shiny head, unfortunately. Here we go. So Andrew had never been for therapy before he came to see me 6 sessions ago. I found him a lovely bloke and a self-proclaimed worrier for as long as he could remember. And last year he'd had a heart attack and a stent fitted, and had been suffering with panic attacks ever since. He'd panic about not having his angina spray, constantly checking and second guessing himself, and getting really anxious about any discomfort in his chest and arms. And he had a very physical job, so he often got discomfort in his chest and arms, so he often got very anxious. Even though he'd been watching his diet and exercising regularly, his stress levels were as high as they'd ever been, and he was giving himself and others quite a hard time by being quick to anger because he was overloaded by stress. It sounded like a really tough place for him to be, and I was really keen to help. He would talk about the stress being buzzing around his head like bees. So every time he engaged with someone, he had this bzzz of the stress that he needed to cut through to engage with. You didn't get the niceness of who he was, you got him fighting to get through the stress. In talking together, he shared that his uncle had once had a heart attack next to him at work. He particularly remembers giving him mouth to mouth and being told by the responders on the other end of the phone, keep him conscious, keep him alive. And when he told me this, I just, oh wow, the pressure you must feel if somebody tells you that. And I don't know if that's what the autoresponders actually did tell him, but that's what he remembered. And that really struck me as a massive burden to carry around with you. This happened some 25 years before, but he hadn't talked to anybody about it in all that time. And a couple of years after that, he lost his dad to a heart attack, and apart from crying a bit at the funeral, he'd never talked about that loss either. He came from a family of people who just didn't particularly talk about their emotions. They were a very practical doer family, doers as in getting stuff done rather than the Scottish use of the word doer. And interestingly, until we'd started talking about it, Andrew had forgotten these experiences, and it hadn't occurred to him that they would still be affecting him even now, which is something I see really commonly, is that the anxious process almost stops you from connecting the dots yourself. And one of the things that happens in the therapy room is I can just bring a bit of clarity to it and connect the dots. I mean, oh yeah, well, of course that's why I'm anxious. It makes perfect sense. That's related to that. Where did we get to? We agreed that much of the pressure and grief from those experiences could be spilling out through his own heart issue now. Even though he was making good changes about looking after himself, he was feeling anxious like he did when his uncle collapsed, and angry and sad like he did when he lost his dad. So those emotions that he didn't get to express at the time when his uncle had his heart attack or his father died sort of built up inside him like a pressure cooker, and his own heart issues became a valve which all this pressure came out, because they never got processed at the time because he didn't talk about them. So over a few sessions we talked about the impact of his uncle and his dad's health problems on him, and Andrew noticed a couple of really significant changes. He said that the stress he'd been feeling had been buzzing around his head constantly like bees, and it had been getting in the way of all of his thinking, but now it had settled right down. He used this hand gesture to say, it's down around my knees now and I can see clearly again. It had been getting in the way of all of his thinking, now it settled right down. It was like the pressure of the last year or so had gone. His relationships at home and work were growing again, and he was even able to think about the good times with his dad, something he'd not been able to do since he had died because thinking about him was too painful. And it was wonderful to see Andrew sitting in my room on the couch across from me, and his face lighting up and smiling about thinking about good times with his dad, which he hadn't thought about for 20 years because it was too painful. It was just a delight to be able to share that experience with him. Andrew was kind enough to say that even though he'd never been to see anyone like me before, I was easy to talk with, non-judgmental, patient and practical. He said it made it easy to talk to me and easy to understand how he'd got into this place and also how to move out of it. So he was really kind to me at the end of this session, particularly seeing as he'd done most of the heavy lifting with it. He'd worked hard in this and really achieved a lot. Working with Andrew was really rewarding, helping a lovely bloke reconnect to his everyday life and get through a few very stressful experiences. It was lovely. And I do want to add at the end of this that confidentiality and permission are a really, really important part of what I do here. Keeping clients' information confidential and obviously not sharing them unless I have permission. And I have Andrew's permission to share this, and obviously Andrew is not his real name. So that was a lovely, lovely experience for me, and I was really pleased to be able to help Andrew out with that. If that sounds like something that you think might be useful for you, do get in touch. Message me on Facebook. You can come to my upcoming presentation. I'll put the link for that for Eventbrite in the notes. And yeah, so it's a conversation. It's a conversation that joins some dots and provides some validation, and that in itself is incredibly useful. That's incredibly useful, and it was a real joy to be able to help Andrew get through that really stressful time. So if that's of interest to you, do make contact. Cheers.